So the next year came, and I was doing this based on a value. If the value ever made sense then, it more than ever makes sense today. That excessive debt is a bad thing. That we have no right as politicians to kick the can down the road and cover up problems and pass them on to the next set of politicians. That we have no right to spend money we don't have to buy the votes of all of you in order to feather our own nests. And we also don't have the right to ring up debt and sell that debt to foreigners who live in another side of the world where they got some control over our future, and that it is just absolutely not right to pass on debt to our children. And I kept getting kicked around and people were laughing at me, but the team grew a little bit bigger. And in 1990, we had a Democratic budget, and we had a Republican budget, and we had the Kasich budget. And that year, we received 106 votes. We lost 305, so I went from 30 to 106. And my newspaper at home, the Columbus Dispatch, started, asking me questions like, aren't you embarrassed by this? I said, well, I feel like a lone wolf on the top of a mountain, except there's a few more wolves up here howling with me. We're just going to keep doing it. So the next year comes 1991, and I went to make a speech to a group of bipartisan members of legislatures across the country. So I got up there and I said, well, I got in my hand the Democratic budget, and this thing is just pathetic, and here's why. And I said, I know that you say he's a Republican. Of course he would say that. I said, well, let me tell you about President George Bush's budget. Terrible! And I explained why. I didn't know there were press people in the room. So the next morning I'm in my office and I get a call from Dan Quayle. You ever heard of him? Yeah. Dan Quayle calls me up and he says, John, the President of the United States is really, really mad at you. In fact, he's hopping mad at what you said about his proposals in the newspaper. And he called me into the Oval Office to tell me this. He said, I told him you were misquoted. You were, weren't you? I said, well, not quite. And we hung up the phone, and I called my girlfriend, who subsequently became my wife, and I said, sweetheart, it's like I've been in trouble since the day I was born. Dan Quayle called me up and told me the president is really, really mad at me. Sweetie, the president of the United States mad at me. We hung up the phone, and a couple hours later, a bouquet of flowers arrived at my desk with a little message. The president may be mad at you, but I'm mad about you. That's when I decided it was time to marry her, huh? Not bad. So anyway, that year we offer the budget again with a little bit bigger team, and that year we received 114 votes, still going up. I lost. It was interesting. The mailman's son got 25 votes more than the President of the United States got for his budget. So I'm thinking we're doing pretty well. Well, Bill Clinton gets elected president, and he decides he wants to raise taxes. And he wants to have more spending. And I told the Republicans that it was not enough. It was not enough to just criticize, that we had to have our own alternative. Now, what politicians are comfortable with is criticizing, but not offering their own plans. And that's how you die in politics. You lose your ideas. So Newt Gingrich said, well, we're going to have a big meeting of all the Republicans in the House, and we're going to consider this idea of having an alternative. So we had the meeting, and there were 44 speakers that day, and 42 of the 44 said, under no circumstances should we have an alternative budget. So I walked back to Newt, and I said, Newt, how do you think we're doing? He says, I think we're doing fantastic. I never thought anybody would speak up for us. So we did offer the alternative, in spite of all the opposition. And frankly, that proposal, cutting spending first, cutting the deficit without raising taxes, became the rallying cry for Republicans in the November of the 1994 election. And in that election, of course, we swept to the majority and won the House of Representatives for the first time in 40 years. And that proposal was the centerpiece of that victory. I become the chairman of the Budget Committee, and I'm going to the promised land of balanced budgets. and we get into a debate with Bill Clinton, who, by the way, never wanted to balance the budget. If there's anything that drives my friends crazy, it's when he tries to take credit, because we had to drag Bill Clinton like an old mule on his backside to realize how significant and important this was. And in 1995, just when I thought we'd get there, we had the government shutdown, because the Republicans said, we're not going to be fibbing, we're not making up numbers, we're not going to do it. And so I believe that the shutdown of that government sent a message to the people in Washington and a message to people around the country that we were willing to sacrifice our own political futures for something that we believed in. Well, as you know, that balanced budget was part of the contract with America, and we were fixing to get it done. Well, after the shutdown, we entered into secret negotiations, and in 1997, we wrote a proposal that balanced the budget and resulted in the first balanced budget since the man walked on the moon. We paid down the largest amount of debt in the history of the United States of America, and we cut taxes on investing and risk-taking, and all the credit for that accomplishment goes to the man that owned that gas station at the corner of Cleveland and Schrock Avenue. We did something historic, and what we proved is that if you believe in things, if you have